When you first look at the Rodney Alcala case, you see the raw statistics.
Right.
And on their own, they tell a horrifying story. At least 5 confirmed murders of women just between 1977 and 1979 in California.
And that's just what's confirmed. But even so, those numbers, they're almost a distraction in a way.
They are, because if you only focus on the statistics, you completely miss the real point, the staggering, enduring impact.
It's entirely insufficient. The cultural shockwaves he sent out were just immense. They went so much further than the quantifiable loss.
So welcome back to the deep dive.
What made this case so explosive was really its timing. It landed right when America was already, swimming in this rising tide of paranoia.
And it just ripped the veil off.
Completely. It exposed these fundamental systemic flaws in our institutions that, well, they essentially allowed him to operate freely.
And that's our mission today. We've got this huge stack of sources, victim impact statements, old news reports that really show the media spectacle, and then the cold analysis of the legal and technological failures.
And we're using them as a shortcut.
Exactly. A shortcut to understand why this one man, Rodney Alcala, became the symbol of 1970s institutional neglect. And I think of a profound public mistrust that we still feel today.
We're really shifting the focus. This isn't the typical dive into a killer's psychology.
No.
We're looking at the collective American psyche, trying to grapple with this new, terrifying reality. The idea that a predator could look charming
Act successful.
and operate in plain sight. Not because he was a genius, but because the systems that were supposed to protect us were just incapable of connecting the dots.
We need to understand what our sources call that canyon of neglect he just scrolled right through.
That's a perfect phrase for it.
So let's unpack this whole history. And we have to begin where the true cost is felt the most. Act 1. The human cost, beyond the statistics.
It's so easy decades on for terms like victim or survivor to become,
Clinical.
clinical abstract. But our sources, especially the trial testimony, the family statements, they just constantly remind you that these were vibrant, complex lives.
Lives that were stolen.
Exactly. And they left behind this psychological aftermath that hasn't healed. And you could argue it never can heal. The trauma isn't measured in years. It's measured in the sustained grief.
By digging into these individual stories, we can start to personalize the tragedy. Let's start with Jill Barkham.
Jill Barkham. She was only 18 years old. Just a kid, really.
And she had just made that big, hopeful move from New York to Los Angeles.
Seeking that classic American dream, right? The California fresh start, independence, opportunity. She was literally at the very beginning of her adult life.
And our sources have this just heartbreaking reflection from her mother, Janet Barkham, and it captures that brutal reality of stolen potential. She remembered Jill's last phone call the night before she was found. Jill was just so excited talking about the LA Sun, about finding a waitressing job.
Just buzzing with the excitement of being on her own for the first time.
Exactly. That pure, unfiltered hope.
Which is what makes the next part so devastating. The arrival of that detective's call.
Janet Barkham described that call as the sound of the world ending. And she made it so clear that this grief, it wasn't something that just fades away into acceptance over time.
Now,
She used this powerful, just devastating metaphor. She said, the sun doesn't shine anymore, not for me. It's been gray for 50 years.
wow, 50 years.
50 years. That level of sustained, profound sorrow. That's the true measure of the crime. The world moved on, but for her mother, the light literally went out forever.
And those ripples of trauma, they didn't just stop with the immediate family.
Not at all. They settled so heavily on people who were just bystanders, friends, accidental witnesses.
Which brings us to the tragic account of Catherine Bryant.
Right. She was the last friend to see another victim, Jill Parento, alive. They were at a disco.
And this is where we really see Alcala's method, his insidious technique. He didn't start with force or fear.
No, it was charm.
All charm and the social currency of the time. Catherine recalled that he introduced himself as the photographer.
Which sounded glamorous, right? Safe, creative.
Totally. And he focused all his attention on Jill Parento, made her feel special. The sources say he made her seem lit up.
He was a master manipulator. He knew how to exploit those fleeting encounters, the superficial glamour of that whole late 70s scene.
But what's so agonizing about Catherine's story is the burden she carried afterward, that crushing survivor's guilt.
She describes having a bad feeling about him, a twist in her gut, but she didn't say anything.
Why not?
She was afraid of being a buzzkill, of ruining the fun.
That's chilling. That social pressure to be polite overriding a primal instinct.
And that one moment of hesitation became her defining trauma. She viewed her silence, that one fleeting moment, as a life sentence.
It's just a terrifying insight. It shows how these crimes inflict these lifelong emotional wounds, not just on the victims who died, but on the people who felt they missed their one chance to change what happened.
They're trapped forever in the what if.
And then, of course, you have the survivors who faced his brutality head-on, the ones who carry the physical and the mental scars.
Monique Hoyt is a crucial example here. She was attacked in February 1979. She was only 15 years old.
Her experience is this chilling demonstration of Alcala's ability to project complete, utter normalcy right up until the second of the attack.
He lured her with the most innocent request you can imagine, asking for directions, looking at a map.
She described him as seeming normal, and that instantaneous switch from just some average guy to a violent attacker.
Yeah.
That's the psychological element that makes him so terrifying.
And the attack was just horrific. He used a hammer. Monique fought back with this incredible resilience, but the trauma, it shattered her. Not just physically, but mentally. She had significant memory loss about what happened.
Which is a classic protective response to extreme trauma.
Yeah.
The brain just shuts it out.
But that memory loss led to this crushing internalized guilt. For years, she felt guilty. She believed she failed because she couldn't remember enough details to describe him.
Oh, that's awful.
She feared that her failure allowed him to go on and kill someone else.
So she's internalizing the system's failure as her own personal failing. That's a profound injustice.
She survived an attempted murder, and she's blaming herself because she couldn't provide the clues that law enforcement, which was, as we'll see, totally unprepared, so desperately needed.
And finally, when we talk about the human cost, we absolutely have to give full attention to Tali Shapiro.
The warning shot.
The clear, undeniable, ignored warning shot. Her attack was in 1968, years before his main killing spree. The system had multiple chances to heed that warning.
Tali Shapiro's story is just the most critical example of this decades-long institutional failure. She survived, which is a miracle in itself.
But for years after, her public identity was just reduced, defined as that little girl who was attacked.
The trauma didn't just injure her, the public narrative hijacked her identity. She had to fight to define herself against this thing that was done to her.
And the pain wasn't just confined to 1968, it came rushing back.
Decades later, she sees his face on the news for these other murders, and she said the original fear, the original pain, it came back instantly.
But this time it was mixed with something else.
A terrible, grieving anger. Anger for the women who died because the system didn't act on the warning that she provided. It's like a secondary victimization.
Being forced to carry the weight of that institutional silence.
But her ultimate resilience is defined by her fight to control that narrative, to reclaim her own story.
She has that powerful statement. He doesn't own my narrative anymore.
It's a hard-won declaration of autonomy. It demands that we shift the focus away from the killer's cleverness and onto the strength it takes to rebuild a life in the shadow of that kind of violence.
That's the real long-term echo of this case. Not his name, but the courage of people like Tali Shapiro, demanding we acknowledge the full generational extent of the damage.
And that emotional intensity, that focus on systemic failure, it transitions us perfectly into our next section. Act 2, the media circus and cultural shockwaves.
Because you just can't talk about Alcala's impact without putting him right in the middle of the panic-stricken American culture of the late 1970s.
This period, it wasn't just about high crime rates. It was a terrifying cultural shift.
It really was. It felt like an epidemic of anonymous violence. You had the Son of Sam case just paralyzing New York City.
Creating a citywide curfew mentality.
And at the same time, the Hillside Strangler was terrifying Los Angeles. Names like Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy.
They were becoming household names, deeply feared names.
And this convergence wasn't an accident. This was the exact moment that the concept of this serial killer was really entering the public lexicon.
The FBI's new behavioral science unit was just starting to pioneer criminal profiling. They were trying to define and understand these patterns of seemingly random, repetitive violence for the very first time.
And the media, driven by this intense competition, they immediately seized on this new terminology. They knew there was a morbid public hunger for an explanation.
As the archives show, these crimes didn't just happen, they sold newspapers.
Oh, absolutely. Serial killers were transformed into what psychology today called celebrity monsters.
And that fed this deep, almost irresistible public fascination with the macabre and the incomprehensible.
People were searching for a narrative, for an explanation for violence that went beyond traditional motives like money or passion.
And right into that vortex of fear and morbid fascination steps Rodney Alcala.
But he doesn't sneak in.
No. He's introduced with bright studio lights, applause, and a catchy theme song.
On the ultimate symbol of American charm and escapism, the dating game. September 1978.
The shocking, sickening contrast. That's why this moment became an instant, indelible cultural flashpoint.
The public learned that the man suspected of these brutal anonymous murders was the same person who had just been on national television as Bachelor Number One.
Everything just fractured in that moment.
He wasn't presented as a threat. He was vetted, he was accepted, he was packaged for public consumption. Charming, successful photographer.
A champion tennis player, even. To all appearances, he was the ideal neighbor, the desirable bachelor.
And that made the reveal of his double life so profoundly unsettling.
Our sources have an analysis from a Dr. Jane Kim, and she calls this the perfect storm that just utterly eroded public confidence.
It was a convergence of two powerful emerging American forces.
On one hand, the rise of the anonymous serial killer narrative.
And on the other, the increasing power of television to create these intimate, seemingly trustworthy personas. The fact that Alcala was approved and presented as this desirable figure, it just completely violated the public's implicit trust in the curated reality of mass media.
And the implication of that revelation, it just fundamentally deepened the paranoia that was already there.
Of course.
It suggested that the monster wasn't easily identifiable. Not by looks, not by social class, not by where they lived.
If the charming guy on TV, the one who was specifically designed to be harmless and desirable, could be a killer,
then absolutely anyone could be. Everyone was suspect.
in the public mind, he became more than just a killer. He was seen as this trickster god who used the media's own tools against them.
He exploited society's reliance on superficial impressions, its trust in its own entertainment, just to hide his horrifying actions.
That image of the killer in the spotlight, it's the ultimate betrayal of normalcy. And it's an image that America has never really been able to shake.
And this whole media spectacle, it inevitably shifted the public debate, and often in a really unproductive way.
How so?
The focus immediately went to how individuals, specifically women, should protect themselves, rather than focusing on the systemic failures that enabled him in the first place.
Ah, yes. The crucial sociological critique that comes out of the contemporary sources.
There was this immediate instinct to put the burden of prevention onto the potential victims.
All the advice was about adjusting their behavior.
Exactly. Cut your hair, stay home at night, don't talk to strangers. The underlying message was, if you are cautious enough, you'll be safe. Which is, just not true.
But there's that critical counter-argument, which is articulated so powerfully in our sources by a fictional writer, Cynthia Rose. She really hits the nail on the head.
She argued that the essential question isn't about victim behavior at all. It's, why did the system allow a convicted, violent sex offender to walk free multiple times?
And that reframing is essential for a deep dive like this. Alcala didn't just slip through the cracks. That's a term we use to excuse systemic negligence.
No, she said he strolled through a canyon of institutional neglect and misogyny.
That completely shifts the focus. It moves from blaming the victim's lack of caution to blaming the fundamental failure of law enforcement, parole, and the communication structures that were just too fragmented and outdated to stop him.
The media itself became a subject of debate, too. A commentator named Mark Dobbs pointed out that while the media exposed the truth, they also helped create the spectacle.
It's a double-edged sword.
He said, the dating game killer is a great headline, but it risks prioritizing entertainment. The shock, the irony over a true, complex understanding of the tragedy and its institutional roots.
And when tragedy becomes entertainment, there's a serious risk.
You start to dehumanize the victims.
Exactly. And ironically, you elevate the killer's reputation for being clever. The media's role here was profoundly mixed. On one hand, they connected the dots for the public. On the other, the intense sensationalism embedded his name in our cultural memory in a way that often eclipsed the lives he violently erased.
That focus on institutional neglect, it leads us directly into Act 3, a society unprepared.
We have to detail the specific, measurable reasons he was able to evade capture for so long. It truly frames the 1970s as a kind of technological and jurisdictional dark age for law enforcement.
Criminologist Michael Arnfield notes in our sources that police in that era were just, in his words, out of their depth.
They were equipped for local transactional crime, a bank robbery, a domestic dispute.
Things with clear motives and local suspects.
Right. But they were entirely unprepared for a mobile, calculating, cross-jurisdictional predator like Alcala. The technology just hadn't caught up to the mobility of modern criminals.
Let's make that technological deficit really palpable. What specifically allowed him to operate with such confidence?
We're talking about an era with no national crime database, no centralized system,
No computerized fingerprint matching.
and crucially, absolutely no DNA analysis. That wasn't even on the horizon.
So think about what that means practically. If a detective in Orange County, California, finds a fingerprint at a crime scene,
They have a physical paper fingerprint card. That's it.
and if the killer committed a crime in New York, that California detective would literally have to mail that physical card to the NYPD.
And then hope that someone on the other end manually cross-references it with their own massive, paper-based, actively filed records.
There was no instantaneous electronic matching, no shared server. It's almost unimaginable today.
So effectively, a killer could just walk across a state line, or even a county line, and become a brand new person in the eyes of that new jurisdiction.
Which leads directly to the core problem, fragmentation and jurisdictional failure.
The crimes happening in different cities and states really were, as one source put it, like islands with no bridge connecting them.
And Alcala's history illustrates this perfectly. He commits that horrific attack on Tali Shapiro in 1968 in California. He's arrested, but then he flees.
And then he resurfaces. He kills Cornelia Crilly in New York, operating under the alias John Berger.
And the LAPD and the NYPD, they just lacked the foundational communication and data infrastructure to connect their fugitive Rodney Alcala with their homicide suspect John Berger.
They were working completely independently, lying to each other's critical evidence.
If they had even a rudimentary shared database, one just linking aliases or warrants, they could have closed that loop a decade before his main killing spree.
But because of these systemic technological silos, Alcala was free to roam across the continent. He could essentially give himself a clean slate just by buying a bus ticket.
And this institutional blindness extended into its public life, leading to that ultimate unbelievable irony.
The dating game.
The dating game. The lack of centralized data meant that when they vetted him for the show, he passed the basic background check.
Even though he was already a registered sex offender with multiple violent convictions.
It's the absolute epitome of bureaucratic failure. A standard manual background check might look for local warrants.
But it couldn't efficiently pull his entire criminal history, especially with out-of-state convictions, parole violations, or crimes he committed under an alias.
He was hiding in the plainest sight imaginable, relying completely on the predictable inefficiency and disorganization of these fragmented state institutions.
But it wasn't just the technology. We have to understand the profound sociological shifts that were making the population more vulnerable, even if people were becoming more independent.
This brings in a really crucial criminological concept, routine activity theory.
Proposed by Lawrence Cohen and Marcus Felson in 1979, the exact same year Alcala was on his deadliest spree.
And this theory is vital because it explains why crime rates can rise even when economic conditions are good.
It states that crime increases when three specific elements converge in time and space. You need motivated offenders, suitable targets, and a lack of capable guardians. The 1970s created that precise convergence.
So let's focus on the suitable targets and the lack of guardians.
Yeah.
The era saw these monumental social changes. Second wave feminism, more women entering the workforce, more women going to college. This gave people more independence, which is obviously vital progress.
But here's the systemic problem that comes with that. That increased independence meant more people were in what the theory calls vulnerable, unsupervised situations.
Commuting alone, walking home from work late at night.
Moving to a new, unfamiliar city without an established social network or community oversight.
These are the suitable targets in the absence of capable guardians, like close neighbors, community patrols, or even just reliable street lighting.
And culturally, this was amplified.
Hitchhiking.
Hitchhiking was massive.
Okay.
A cultural hallmark of anti-establishment sentiment and a kind of casual trust.
So this tolerance for interacting with strangers in unsupervised settings, combined with a fragmented police force, It created what one source called ideal hunting grounds for predators.
Especially predators like Alcala, who relied on charm and deceit to lure their victims,
Right.
rather than just overt force.
So the very structures of an increasingly independent and mobile society inadvertently made it easier for someone like him to identify, approach, and isolate his targets in these unmonitored public spaces.
It was a cultural and systemic problem, not a behavioral one, despite how the media tried to frame it.
And we can't forget the sheer crushing volume of crime that was overwhelming the police in this era. The U.S. homicide rate overall nearly doubled between 1960 and 1980.
Police departments were just drowning, and the nature of the violence was changing too.
It was becoming more impersonal. Stranger homicides were rising rapidly.
And when you have an environment where overall crime is soaring and the attacks are anonymous, the public starts looking for explanations that go beyond the mundane.
And that's why the serial killer, this new defined threat, became the mythic monster of the age.
Alcala wasn't just another killer in the statistics. He represented the chaos, the technological failure, and the profound breakdown of public trust that defined that whole decade.
And that failure demanded a fix. The shockwaves were so powerful that they finally forced some necessary, enduring change.
Which brings us into Act 4, the enduring legacy and systemic change.
It's the silver lining, I guess. The same media frenzy that sensationalized these crimes also provided the profound impetus for meaningful, lasting policy reforms.
The shock was just too great to ignore. One of the first responses was about financial accountability.
The Son of Sam laws.
Exactly. The media spectacle around killers led directly to the creation of these laws, which were explicitly designed to prevent criminals from profiting from their crimes.
No book deals, no paid interviews, no selling their story.
It was a critical, ethical, and legal step. If the killer was going to be made into a celebrity monster, the law was designed to make sure that celebrity had zero financial value for the perpetrator.
And that action, spurred directly by public outrage, recentered the focus, at least legally, on the victims and their families.
But maybe the most impactful structural change was fixing those information gaps that Alcala so skillfully exploited.
The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, which had helped popularize the term serial killer, recognized that this failure was systemic and national.
And that recognition led directly to the creation of VICAP.
The Violent Criminal Apprehension Program.
This was the long overdue bridge needed to connect those isolated islands of jurisdiction that had allowed Alcala to commit crimes in California and New York with total impunity.
VICAP was designed to be a unified national database for analyzing violent crime patterns.
It centralized the data. It linked serial crimes across state lines based on behavioral patterns, victimology, method of operation, not just fingerprints or aliases. It was the direct, systematic answer to the fragmentation that had allowed killers to continue their sprees just by moving across the map.
But the legacy of Alcala's methods, well, it continues to haunt us today, particularly through that shocking and disturbing collection of photographs found in his storage locker. This is the lingering investigation.
This discovery it's maybe the most visceral, terrifying piece of his legacy.
Hundreds of photographs. Unknown men, women, and children.
And it hints at a potential victim pool far, far exceeding the confirmed count. Law enforcement continues to investigate these photos to this day, decades later.
Working to identify the subjects to see if they represent other cold cases or victims who were never even reported missing.
It speaks volumes about the scale of his compulsion and the chilling breadth of his activities.
And the continuation of that investigation is driven by this deep ethical need to provide answers even decades later to families who still don't know what happened to their loved ones. Every face identified is a small victory against the vast darkness he left behind.
The final necessary part of this legacy, though, it rests with the survivors and the families, and their powerful rejection of this neat, tidy narrative of closure.
They teach us that justice isn't an emotional endpoint.
Janet Barkham's quote on this is just. It's absolutely essential. She said, "There is no closure. There's a before and there's an after. In the after, you just learn to breathe the gray air."
That one statement just dispels the entire myth we rely on. The idea that a conviction or an execution will magically heal the wound.
Justice isn't closure. It's a mechanism of accountability. The pain remains. But justice provides the accountability that's necessary to allow the families to survive in the after, to learn how to breathe that gray air without the killer walking free.
And Tali Shapiro's final demand is that the narrative itself has to be shifted away from the perpetrator.
She insists the story should not be about how clever the killer was. It should be about the vibrant lives he took and, critically, about the systemic changes that were forced into existence because of their sacrifice.
That's the echo that matters, she said.
It's a demand for a historical memory that honors the victims and learns from catastrophic failure. The lasting significance of the Alcala case is that it acted as this brutal, necessary catalyst. It forced a society to address its technological deficits and its cultural negligence, and it pushed law enforcement into the 21st century.
So this deep dive into the source material, it really shows us that the Alcala case is so much more than a simple true crime story.
hmm
It's a defining story of a specific moment in American history, this confluence of rapid social change, profound societal fear of the unknown predator, and the critical institutional limitations that he exploited perfectly for far, far too long.
It really is the ultimate story of systemic fragmentation, where outdated technology, stifling bureaucracy, and these fractured jurisdictions all combine to enable a dangerous, calculating man to become a symbol of terror for an entire generation.
And as the victims' voices make so painfully clear, the ultimate takeaway, the lesson that has to endure, is the demand to remember their names, their potential, their courage, and their lasting legacy, not just the name of the killer.
Indeed. And while we've covered the cultural and systemic shockwaves that followed his main killing period, the sources all indicate that the legal saga went on for decades, from the initial trials to years on death row and countless appeals.
Right.
And it raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider, something we didn't have time to explore today. After nearly half a century of appeals, trials, and just waiting for a final resolution, what does the final legal resolution of a case like this truly mean for the families who must finally face the final sentence?
That is a thought to carry with you, long after the headlines fade. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive into the Alcala shockwaves. We hope this has provided you with a thorough, contextualized understanding of this critical historical moment.